Millionaire CEO was dining at a elite hotel until a little girl wrote on his napkin. He cried. Before starting to watch this story, tell us in the comments section from which city you're watching this story. Let's enjoy this story. Ethan Hayes sat alone in the corner booth of the Grill House, a five-star restaurant located in the heart of downtown Chicago. The ambient lighting reflected off the polished mahogany tables, the hum of soft jazz music in the background making the atmosphere feel like a well-curated painting of luxury. He glanced around at the elegantly dressed patrons, most of whom seemed to be engaged in lively conversations with colleagues, spouses, or friends. But not Ethan. He always dined alone, just like he did nearly every night. His success had come at a price: isolation. At 42, Ethan was a millionaire tech CEO, one of the most sought-after entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley. But his personal life? That was a different story. He had built a billion-dollar company, shattered records, and driven innovation in a way few people could even imagine. Yet, despite all his accomplishments, there was an undeniable emptiness within him. There was no one to share his victories with, no one to celebrate the highs or comfort him in the lows. His eyes wandered to the menu in front of him, though he already knew what he would order. Filet mignon, medium rare, with a side of truffle mashed potatoes and a glass of Cabernet Sauvignon. Ethan had a routine. He always ordered the same thing, always dined at places like the Grill House where the rich and famous gathered, and always ate in solitude. It wasn't as if he had no friends or acquaintances. His calendar was packed with meetings, events, and phone calls. But true connections? He didn't have time for that. It was easier to just keep moving forward, to keep building his empire, than to confront the deeper questions about his own happiness. As the waiter set down his plate in front of him, Ethan smiled politely, murmuring his thanks before picking up his fork. The rich aroma of the steak filled his senses, but somehow, it felt hollow, as if the food itself was just another part of the routine, not something to be savored. His mind wandered as he cut into the tender meat, chewing mechanically. He wondered if he had ever truly tasted anything in his life, or if it was all just a blur of luxury and excess. For years, he had poured his energy into creating something monumental. Yet here he was at the pinnacle of success, and still he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. A soft sound interrupted his thoughts. He looked up to see a little girl standing near his table, holding a crayon in her hand, her big brown eyes wide with curiosity. She was no more than 6 or 7 years old, wearing a simple pink dress that seemed a little out of place in the upscale restaurant. Ethan glanced around, wondering why she was here, but no one appeared to be paying attention. The girl, seemingly oblivious to the fancy surroundings, took a few tentative steps toward his table. Ethan raised an eyebrow but said nothing. It wasn't uncommon for children to be out with their families, but it was rare for them to approach a stranger in such a manner. "Hi," she said in a soft voice, her eyes looking up at him with innocence. "What are you eating?" Ethan's first instinct was to smile politely and dismiss her, but something in her earnest question stopped him. He had dealt with countless business deals, presentations, and negotiations, but this little girl wasn't interested in any of that. She was simply curious about his food, as children often were. He found himself unexpectedly charmed by her innocence. "It's steak," Ethan replied, trying to be kind. "Very good steak." Her eyes lit up at the mention of the word, and before Ethan could react, she had grabbed a napkin from the side of his table. Ethan watched in slight confusion as she picked up a crayon from the little pouch she had been carrying and began to scribble something onto the napkin. She wasn't asking for anything, wasn't interrupting his meal for some grand purpose. She was simply writing on the napkin, lost in her own little world. Ethan felt a twinge of amusement. "What are you writing?" he asked, his tone softening. The girl looked up at him, her face serious despite her youth. "Just a picture," she said, then added, "I like to write notes for people." She handed him the napkin before Ethan could respond, her small hands eager to show her work. He glanced at it curiously. There, written in crayon, was a short sentence. "Do you have a family to love you?" Ethan blinked. He wasn't sure what to make of it. The simplicity of the question hit him in a way he hadn't expected. It wasn't just an innocent question from a child. It was a question that seemed to pierce through the armor of his self-made success and into something deeper, something he had long avoided confronting. He wasn't sure why, but the words, "to love you," echoed in his mind as he stared at the napkin. The little girl smiled at him, seemingly satisfied with her work, and without another word she turned and walked back to her table, where her mother, a young woman in her 30s, sat quietly watching. The mother seemed embarrassed but gave Ethan a polite nod, as if to apologize for the interruption. Ethan, still holding the napkin, felt a strange lump form in his throat. His mind raced as he processed what had just happened. In the years he had spent climbing the ladder of success, Ethan had never once stopped to consider whether he had someone to love him. His achievements had been driven by ambition and the desire to prove himself, not by the desire for connection. He had often told himself that being alone was a small price to pay for success. But as he sat there, holding the napkin in his hands, he couldn't ignore the sting of the question. Do you have a family to love you? It was so simple, so innocent. Yet it cut through the layers of his carefully constructed world, exposing a raw, vulnerable part of himself that he had long buried. He could almost feel the weight of the question pressing on him, tugging at his conscience. As he finished his meal in a daze, the taste of the steak had faded, and all that remained was the nagging feeling of something left undone, something more important than any business deal or investment. The little girl's words, written so innocently on the napkin, had unsettled him in a way he couldn't explain. The luxury of the restaurant, the fine wine, the expensive food, it all seemed so irrelevant now. Ethan Hayes had everything money could buy, but in that moment he realized he didn't have what truly mattered. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. The next few days passed in a blur for Ethan. He found himself distracted, often replaying the moment with the little girl over and over in his mind. Do you have a family to love you? The words echoed in his thoughts, haunting him. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted within him. It was as if the universe had sent that little girl into his life at the precise moment when he needed to hear that question most. But why? Ethan wasn't sure. At first he tried to dismiss it. He had a busy schedule, after all, filled with meetings, investor calls, and business negotiations. He was the CEO of a successful tech company in San Francisco, a leader in his field, and a man who had built everything from the ground up. Relationships were secondary to him, and any thoughts of family or love had long been relegated to the back of his mind. But the question lingered, refusing to be ignored. One morning, as Ethan sat at his desk, staring at the endless emails piling up, his assistant Olivia knocked and entered his office. Olivia was one of the few people Ethan trusted, though their relationship was strictly professional. She was efficient, organized, and always on top of things. Mr. Hayes, there's a charity event happening at the Ritz-Carlton this Saturday, she said, handing him a folder. They've invited you to attend as a guest of honor. It's for children's education in underprivileged areas, and they've asked if you'd like to donate. I think it might be a good opportunity for you to connect with potential partners. Ethan glanced at the details, not particularly interested. He wasn't the type to attend charity events. He had always seen them as more about appearances than actual impact. Still, he didn't want to seem rude, so he nodded and told Olivia to confirm his attendance. He felt no excitement or enthusiasm about it, he was just going through the motions. Saturday evening came, and Ethan found himself in the grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton. The room was filled with the usual faces, the wealthy elite, business tycoons, and high-profile figures from various industries. The clink of champagne glasses, the hum of polite conversation, and the sound of laughter filled the air, but to Ethan, it all felt hollow. He stood at the back of the room, watching the event unfold, a glass of wine in hand, but his mind was elsewhere. It had been a long time since he had felt a sense of belonging in a room like this. He couldn't help but think about that little girl and her question. Ethan couldn't remember the last time he'd truly connected with someone. Not just in a transactional sense but on a personal, human level. Most of his relationships had been either about business or convenience. His few romantic entanglements had been fleeting and unfulfilling. He had never taken the time to build meaningful connections, to truly care about another person beyond what they could offer him. Now, as he stood there, surrounded by strangers, he realized how much he had missed out on. As the evening progressed, Ethan wandered through the ballroom, half listening to speeches and trying to make small talk with the other guests. He found himself standing by a silent auction table, glancing over the items up for bid, when he heard a familiar voice behind him. Mr. Hayes. Ethan turned around to see Lily and her mother, Sarah, approaching him. He was momentarily taken aback. He hadn't expected to see them here, of all places. Lily was holding her mother's hand, her eyes wide with curiosity. She smiled at Ethan, her face lighting up when she saw him. Hi. Lily said, her voice as sweet and innocent as ever. I remember you from the restaurant. Ethan smiled, though he felt a wave of discomfort wash over him. The last thing he had expected was to run into her again. And yet, there she was, standing in front of him, her simple presence somehow grounding him. Hello, Lily, Ethan said, crouching down slightly so he could look her in the eyes. I didn't expect to see you here. Sarah, her mother, gave him a polite smile. We're volunteers for the event, she explained. Lily's been helping out with the children's section. She loves drawing and wants to support the cause. Ethan glanced at Lily, who was still holding her crayon-drawn napkin tightly in her hand. She beamed at him, as if nothing about the event or the high society atmosphere fazed her. Her innocence, her joy at just being part of something bigger than herself, struck Ethan in a way he wasn't prepared for. "Lily, you're drawing again?" Ethan asked, his tone a little softer now. He was intrigued by her carefree spirit, something he had long forgotten how to embrace. Lily nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah. I like making pictures for people just like I did last time." She held up the napkin, and Ethan's heart skipped a beat when he saw that she had written something on it again, just as she had at the restaurant. On the napkin, in her childlike scrawl, were the words, "Do you want to be my friend?" Ethan's throat tightened. It wasn't the question he had expected, but somehow, it hit him harder than any business deal or success he had ever achieved. He realized that, for all his wealth and accomplishments, he had never asked himself if he wanted to be someone's friend. Had he ever truly valued friendship, or was he just collecting people for the sake of his own image? "Of course I would like to be your friend, Lily," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. He wasn't sure why, but it felt important to say it, to acknowledge the simple purity of her offer. Lily smiled, and for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt a sense of warmth fill him. It wasn't the fleeting, shallow connections he had experienced in the business world, it was something deeper, something that made him feel, if only for a moment, like he mattered to someone beyond his net worth or his position. As the evening wore on, Ethan found himself lost in conversation with Sarah and Lily, talking not about business or success, but about life, about dreams, and about the things that truly mattered. It was refreshing. In their company, he realized how much he had been missing all these years, how much he had been missing the simple joy of human connection. The event ended, and as Ethan walked out of the ballroom, he felt lighter than he had in a long time. The weight of the question, "Do you have a family to love you?" still lingered, but it no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a doorway, a gateway to something new. For the first time in years, Ethan Hayes was starting to think that maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than success. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. The following week, Ethan found himself in an entirely different mindset. The luxury of the Ritz-Carlton, the successful meetings, the deals, and everything that had once filled him with pride now seemed less important. Instead, what haunted his thoughts was a simple question from a little girl, the weight of which he couldn't shake off. "Do you have a family to love you?" He had spent years building an empire, but none of it had prepared him for that moment of vulnerability. His mornings used to be filled with strategic decisions, mergers, and countless emails, but now, his routine seemed almost meaningless. He had everything a man could want: money, status, influence, but what good was it if he lacked genuine human connections? It wasn't until that charity event that he truly understood the depth of his loneliness. The realization didn't come all at once, but rather, it built up over several days. When Ethan looked in the mirror, he no longer saw the CEO, the man who had made a name for himself. Instead, he saw someone who had lost touch with the most basic aspects of life. As the week passed, he began rethinking his life and the choices that had led him here. His relationships had always been transactional, revolving around business and status. Even the few romantic entanglements he'd had been shallow, fleeting. There had been no one to ask him if he had a family to love him, no one who seemed to care beyond what he could offer. And now, after hearing those words from Lily, he found himself wishing he could find someone who truly cared for him, someone who could love him for who he was, not for what he had achieved. Ethan's self-reflection led him to a realization. He needed to change. He didn't know exactly what that change would look like yet, but he knew he couldn't continue living the way he had. For the first time in a long while, he felt a stirring inside him to reconnect with people, to stop focusing so much on his wealth and power. He wanted to rediscover the things that made life meaningful: the laughter of children, the warmth of a hug, the feeling of being loved unconditionally. He spent the next few days trying to step out of his comfort zone. One afternoon he made a decision that surprised even him. He would visit a local shelter in San Francisco that provided support for families in need. The idea had come to him on a whim, but the more he thought about it, the more it seemed like a step in the right direction. The shelter had always been an organization he had heard about but never thought to engage with. Now, with his new perspective, he felt compelled to do something different. When Ethan arrived at the shelter, he was greeted by Mary, the director of the facility. Mary was a woman in her late 40s, warm and kind-hearted. She had been running the shelter for nearly a decade and had seen it all: families struggling to make ends meet, children needing care, and adults fighting to overcome addiction. As soon as she saw Ethan, her eyes widened in recognition. "Mr. Hayes, it's an honor to meet you," she said with a genuine smile. "We don't often get people from your position here, but it's always a pleasure when someone like you takes the time to visit." Ethan smiled awkwardly, feeling out of place. "I've been thinking a lot lately about how disconnected I've become from people who need help," he confessed. "I've been so focused on my own life that I've lost sight of what really matters." Mary looked at him, sensing the sincerity in his words. "It's never too late to make a difference," she said, guiding him through the shelter. As she showed him around, Ethan was struck by the stories of the families living there. He met a single mother named Jessica who had 2 young children. Jessica had lost her job when the company she worked for shut down, and she had been struggling to make ends meet ever since. She spoke of how grateful she was for the shelter, which had provided her with a roof over her head and a sense of stability. Ethan couldn't help but think of his own privileges, his mansion, his expensive clothes, his endless supply of food and comforts, and here was a woman who, despite her hardships, was grateful for something as simple as a roof over her head. He also met a young man named Tommy, who had been in and out of foster care for most of his life. Tommy's story was heartbreaking. He had grown up in an abusive household and had never known what it was like to have a loving, stable family. Yet, despite everything, Tommy had an infectious optimism about him. He was determined to turn his life around, to build a future for himself. Ethan was moved by Tommy's resilience, and for the first time in a long while, he felt the urge to do something to help. Over the next hour, Ethan learned more about the shelter's needs. They were always in need of donations, whether financial or in kind. He listened carefully as Mary explained the programs they offered: counseling for families, job training for adults, after-school programs for children. Ethan was amazed at the impact a place like this could have on the community. He had spent so many years building his empire, but he had never thought about how he could help others. By the time Ethan left the shelter, he felt something inside him begin to shift. The day had been an eye-opener for him. He realized that while he had built a successful business, he had neglected the most important thing in life: human connection. The families he had met that day had so little, but they had something he didn't: hope. They hadn't given up on life, even when life had dealt them cruel hands. And that hope was something Ethan needed to rediscover for himself. As he drove back to his mansion in the hills, he thought about how he could give back. He didn't have all the answers yet, but he knew that he wanted to do more than just write a check. He wanted to get involved, to make a real difference in people's lives. Maybe, he thought, by helping others he could finally start to heal the emptiness he had felt for so long. When he arrived home, Ethan sat at his desk, staring at the pictures of his business successes on the wall. But instead of feeling pride, he felt something different: a sense of yearning for something more meaningful. He knew that, just like the families at the shelter, he too needed to find his own sense of purpose beyond his wealth and power. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. The following weekend, Ethan found himself standing outside the San Francisco Children's Hospital, a place he had never given much thought to in the past. The building, modern and imposing, stood in front of him like a symbol of the very thing he had been trying to avoid: human vulnerability. But today, it wasn't the sterile appearance of the hospital that caught his attention. It was the faces of the children he had seen in a brochure earlier that week. Faces like those of little Mia, who had been diagnosed with leukemia at the tender age of 5, and Lucas, a boy whose spine had never fully developed, leaving him wheelchair-bound since birth. As he stood there in the crisp morning air, the weight of his decision to visit this place was beginning to sink in. He wasn't sure what he expected to find, but he certainly didn't expect to feel this wave of guilt rushing over him. The truth was, Ethan had never been the type of man who took the time to visit places like this. His life had been a whirlwind of business meetings, conferences, and flights to distant cities. He had worked hard to climb to the top, but as he reached the pinnacle of success, he realized that the view wasn't as fulfilling as he had imagined. Now, as he stood there, he couldn't help but feel like a stranger in a world he had deliberately distanced himself from. A world of sickness, suffering, and children who needed help. Inside, the hospital had a calm yet bustling atmosphere. Nurses moved swiftly down the hallways, doctors in white coats discussed treatment plans, and parents sat quietly in waiting rooms, their faces etched with worry and hope. Ethan had never been this close to illness in his adult life. The reality of it was overwhelming. He had been so wrapped up in his own success that he had failed to see the struggles of others. Today he was determined to change that. He was greeted by Dr. Catherine Green, a pediatric oncologist who had been working at the hospital for over 15 years. Dr. Green was warm and professional, with a comforting demeanor that put Ethan at ease. She introduced him to the staff and showed him around the various wards. They passed by rooms where children with all sorts of conditions, cancer, heart defects, and neurological disorders, were undergoing treatment. Ethan was struck by the courage of these children, many of whom were only a few years old, yet already fighting battles that most adults could hardly comprehend. It was in one of the rooms that Ethan met Mia. She was lying in a hospital bed, her small frame tucked beneath a soft blanket. Her pale skin contrasted sharply with the bright yellow walls of her room, but it was her smile that stood out the most. Despite her diagnosis, despite the chemotherapy treatments she had endured for the past year, Mia's smile radiated an undeniable light. She looked up at Ethan with wide, curious eyes, and in that moment he felt something stir deep inside him. "You must be Mr. Hayes," Mia said in a tiny voice, her words slightly muffled by the oxygen mask she wore. "You're the man who's going to help us." Ethan was taken aback. "Help you?" he asked, his voice faltering. "My mom told me you're going to help build a playroom for kids like me," Mia explained, her smile never fading. "That way we don't have to stay in bed all the time. We can play and it'll make us feel better." Ethan was speechless. He hadn't known about any playroom project. He was here because he had made the decision to visit, to see firsthand the work that the hospital was doing. But here was Mia, with her innocent hope, already assuming that he had some grand plan to make her life better. Her words, so simple and pure, struck him harder than any business deal he had ever closed. That's exactly why I'm here," Ethan managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. "I'd love to help in any way I can." Mia beamed at him, her eyes brightening as if he had just given her the world. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes," she said excitedly, her enthusiasm contagious. "When the playroom is ready, we can all play together and it will be so much fun." Ethan smiled, but inside he was torn. He had spent years focused on material success, thinking that wealth was the ultimate goal. But here, in this small hospital room, he saw the truth of life. It wasn't about money. It was about connection, kindness, and the willingness to give back. Mia had given him more than just a smile, she had given him perspective. As the day went on, Ethan continued to meet the children and their families. He met Lucas, the boy in the wheelchair who was working on a school project with his mother, and Sarah, a teenager battling a rare blood disorder who loved to draw. Each of them had their own unique story, but they all shared one thing in common: they were fighting for their lives with everything they had. And while Ethan had been living a life full of luxury, he realized that these children, with their limited time and resources, were richer in spirit than he could ever hope to be. By the end of the day, Dr. Green showed Ethan a proposal for the playroom Mia had mentioned. The hospital had been hoping to build it for years, but they lacked the funding to do so. The space would be a sanctuary for children undergoing treatment, a place where they could escape the sterile environment of the hospital and simply be kids again. Ethan, without hesitation, promised to fund the project, but it wasn't just about the money. It was about the way these children had changed him, made him see the world through their eyes. As he left the hospital, Ethan felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had been given the opportunity to make a difference, not through business deals or financial strategies, but through genuine human connection. He knew that this was just the beginning. There was more work to be done, more lives to touch, and more lessons to learn. For the first time in a long while, he felt that he was on the right path. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. The following weeks passed by in a blur for Ethan. After his visit to the hospital, something had changed within him. He found himself waking up earlier each day, feeling more motivated than he had in years. It wasn't the usual rush to check his emails or review his portfolio, but something deeper, a sense of purpose that seemed to have eluded him for so long. The plans for the playroom project began to take shape, and with each meeting and conversation, Ethan found himself more invested in the work being done for the children at the San Francisco Children's Hospital. He wasn't just a passive donor anymore. He was becoming an active participant, someone who genuinely cared about the impact his contributions could make. One afternoon he sat in his office at Hayes Enterprises, a towering building in downtown San Francisco, looking over the design proposals for the playroom. His assistant, Julia, knocked on the door and entered with a soft smile. "Mr. Hayes, there's a call for you. It's Dr. Green from the hospital." Ethan nodded, pressing the speakerphone button. "Put her through." "Ethan, how are you?" Dr. Green's voice came through clearly, warm as ever. "I just wanted to thank you again for your incredible generosity. We've been able to start the process of selecting contractors and finalizing designs, and it's all moving so much faster than we anticipated." "That's fantastic news," Ethan replied, leaning back in his chair, his fingers tapping lightly on the desk. "It's the least I could do. I want to make sure this space is everything the kids need." Dr. Green laughed softly. I think you're doing more than just building a playroom. You're helping to create a sanctuary for these kids, a place where they can escape the realities of their illness, even for just a little while. Ethan paused for a moment, her words hitting him in a way they hadn't before. I've been thinking about it a lot, actually. I never realized how much this could mean to them. It's not just about having toys or games. It's about giving them some kind of normalcy. You're absolutely right, Dr. Green agreed. These children spend so much time in treatment, but when they have a space like this, they're not just patients. They're kids with hopes, dreams, and stories just like any other child. And you've helped make that possible. The conversation continued for a few more minutes, discussing the next steps and how Ethan could be involved with the hospital's ongoing projects. As the call ended, Ethan felt a sense of satisfaction that he hadn't experienced in years. He realized that the work he was doing for the children had somehow started to fill a void within him that money and business ventures never had. As the weeks turned into months, the playroom began to take shape. Ethan visited the hospital frequently, overseeing the progress and getting to know more about the staff and the children. He spent time in the hospital's play therapy room, where therapists worked with kids to help them cope with the emotional challenges of their illness. These sessions, he learned, were just as important as the medical treatment. They gave the children an outlet to express their fears, anxieties, and frustrations, something that he, as an adult, could hardly comprehend but was beginning to understand on a deeper level. One day, as he was walking down one of the hospital's corridors, a familiar voice called out to him. Mr. Hayes. Ethan turned to see Mia, her small face brightening up as she spotted him. She was holding a colorful picture in her hand, a drawing of a sun and a rainbow that stretched across the page. Hey Mia, Ethan smiled, crouching down to her level. What have you got there? Mia beamed and handed him the drawing. It's for you, she exclaimed, her voice full of excitement. It's the playroom. I drew it just like how I imagine it'll look. There's a slide and lots of toys and a big table for coloring. It's going to be so fun. Ethan looked at the drawing, feeling a lump form in his throat. The innocence and hope in Mia's gesture was overwhelming. She wasn't just a patient, she was a little girl who believed wholeheartedly that the world could be a better place, one color at a time. This is beautiful, Mia, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You're going to make it come true, you know that? She nodded confidently, her eyes sparkling. I know. I just want everyone to be happy. Ethan stood up, clutching the drawing in his hand as if it were a precious treasure. He walked with Mia back to her room, talking about the playroom and what Mia would do when it was finished. It amazed him how someone so young could hold on to so much hope, even in the face of unimaginable challenges. As he walked through the hospital, past the rooms where other children were undergoing treatment, he realized how much he had learned in such a short time. These children, with their immense courage, had become his teachers. They had shown him what truly mattered, not wealth or success, but the ability to make a positive difference in the lives of others, to bring light to dark places. As the playroom neared completion, Ethan organized a small event to celebrate its opening. It was a simple ceremony with children, parents, and staff gathered in the newly finished space. There was laughter, there was joy, and there was a sense of community that Ethan hadn't known he was missing. As he stood there watching Mia and the other children play, something inside him clicked. He wasn't just a businessman or a philanthropist. He was part of something much bigger than himself. A movement that was about giving, about healing, and about creating a future where no child had to face their battles alone. As the day drew to a close, Ethan stood on the balcony of the hospital, looking out over the city. San Francisco stretched out before him, a city full of stories, of lives both ordinary and extraordinary. He had found his place in that tapestry, and for the first time in a long while, he felt truly content. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Ethan woke up early one morning with a sense of anticipation he hadn't felt in years. The sky over San Francisco was clear, the sun just beginning to peek over the horizon, casting a soft orange glow on the city below. It had been a month since the playroom's opening, and things were going well. He had taken on new projects, focused more on his family, and continued to work with the hospital. But today was different. Today he was scheduled to meet with the hospital's board of directors to discuss the future of the children's programs, an opportunity that could change everything. As he sat in his office, preparing for the meeting, his mind wandered back to the day he first met Mia. She had given him that drawing, the one of the playroom, and it had been a turning point for him. He had never expected a small gesture from a little girl to shift his perspective so dramatically. That simple drawing had ignited something inside him, a desire to do more, to be more than just a businessman who wrote checks and attended charity events. He wanted to be someone who made a lasting impact, who truly changed lives for the better. He shook his head, trying to focus. The meeting was important and he needed to be sharp. He knew that if the hospital's programs expanded, they could reach even more children, but it required more resources, more commitment. Ethan had the means, but he also had the responsibility. It was a responsibility that felt heavier now, knowing that every decision he made could affect the lives of children like Mia, who had so little but still managed to hold on to hope. The boardroom at the hospital was filled with familiar faces as Ethan entered. Dr. Green, the hospital's director, greeted him warmly. "Ethan, it's good to see you. We're thrilled that you could join us today." He smiled, shaking her hand. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." The meeting began with a review of the hospital's current programs. Ethan sat at the table, listening intently as the board members spoke about various projects and the funding required to keep them running. He had always been good at business, at analyzing financial reports and making tough decisions, but today it felt different. He wasn't just reviewing numbers. He was reviewing the future of a community, the future of children who needed support in ways that went beyond what medical care alone could provide. As the meeting progressed, the conversation shifted to the topic of expansion. Dr. Green stood up, pointing to a presentation on the screen. "We've seen a significant improvement in the children's emotional and psychological health since the playroom was completed. But we're just scratching the surface. We need more space, more resources, and more specialized programs to ensure that these kids have the tools they need to cope with their circumstances." Ethan felt his heart race. This was the moment he had been waiting for. "How much are we talking about?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Dr. Green hesitated for a moment, then answered, "The initial cost of expanding the playroom and building additional therapy spaces would be around $2 million. We also need funding for a specialized education program to help these children continue their studies while in the hospital. Overall, the total would be closer to $5 million. The figures hung in the air, but they didn't feel as daunting as they once would have. Ethan had more than enough resources to make this happen, but it wasn't just about money. It was about how much of himself he was willing to invest in this cause. He thought about the hours he had spent in the hospital, getting to know the staff, the children, and their families. He thought about Mia's drawing, her simple belief that the playroom could change their lives. He thought about how much more could be done, how many more children could find comfort, joy, and a sense of normalcy. Without hesitating, Ethan spoke up. "I'll cover the full $5 million. Let's get started on this expansion right away." The room went quiet for a moment as everyone processed his words. Dr. Green's eyes widened and she smiled, clearly moved by his generosity. "Ethan, are you sure? This is a huge commitment." He nodded, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. "I'm sure. I've seen what this hospital is doing and I've seen what it means to these children. It's not just about building a space, it's about giving them a future, a chance to heal, to grow, and to dream. This is the least I can do." The board members exchanged looks, some nodding in approval, others still trying to grasp the magnitude of Ethan's offer. But for Ethan, it wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about making a difference in the lives of children who, like him, had once been caught up in their own lives, in their own dreams, without ever considering how their actions could impact others. As the meeting ended, Dr. Green approached him again. "Ethan, I can't thank you enough. You're truly making a difference here. These children will have a chance they never would have had otherwise." Ethan smiled, his eyes softening. "I'm just doing what anyone should do. We all have a responsibility to help those who need it the most." Later that evening, as he sat in his car on the way home, Ethan couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come. He had started out as a man who only cared about business, about numbers, about making more money. But now he was part of something bigger. He was part of a community that cared about people, about helping those who had no voice, who had no power. And that felt better than any business deal he had ever closed. At home, he sat down to dinner with his wife, Rebecca. She smiled as he walked in. "How was your day?" Ethan took a deep breath and smiled back, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. "It was a good day. A really good day." Rebecca raised an eyebrow, sensing there was more. "What happened?" "I made a decision today," he said, his voice steady. "We're going to expand the hospital's programs. We're going to make sure these kids have everything they need to heal, to grow, and to dream." Rebecca's face softened and she reached across the table, taking his hand. "That's amazing, Ethan. I'm so proud of you." He squeezed her hand, knowing that it wasn't just about the money. It was about the people, the lives, and the little moments that made everything worth it. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Ethan stood at the window of his office in downtown San Francisco, gazing out at the city below. The skyline shimmered in the afternoon sun, and he couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. Things had been going well at the hospital. The new playroom and therapy spaces were finally coming together, and the team had already seen significant improvements in the children's mental health. But as satisfying as all this progress was, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that there was still more to be done. His life had changed since that day at the restaurant, and he found himself more focused on his philanthropic work than ever before. His priorities had shifted. He had always been a man who thrived on success, on building an empire from the ground up. But now, his success was measured in moments: the smile on a child's face when they entered the new playroom, the gratitude in a parent's eyes as they saw their child find joy in a place that had once been full of pain. But Ethan was beginning to feel the pressure. The responsibility of being a CEO, a philanthropist, and now a public figure in his own right, was weighing on him. He had always been a private man, preferring to keep his personal life away from the spotlight. Yet, ever since his donation to the hospital, his name had been plastered on every media outlet in San Francisco. He had become the face of corporate giving, a hero to the children he had helped. But he wasn't entirely comfortable with this new version of himself. He didn't want to be seen as just another wealthy man throwing money at a problem. He wanted to make sure his efforts were genuine, that they were about real, lasting change. Ethan's phone buzzed, breaking his thoughts. It was a text from Mia's mother, Sarah. They had stayed in touch after their meeting in the hospital, and Sarah had become a close friend over the past few months. Mia, Sarah's daughter, had been the catalyst for all of this, the reason Ethan had turned his attention to the hospital in the first place. The text was brief but clear. "Mia has been asking about you again. She says she wants to see you in the playroom." Ethan smiled to himself. He hadn't forgotten about Mia, and he was eager to visit the hospital again. He had made a promise to her, to be there whenever she needed him. It wasn't just a promise to the children at the hospital. It was a promise he made to himself. The next day, Ethan drove to the hospital, his mind full of thoughts about the future. The expansion of the hospital's programs was only the beginning. There was so much more that could be done, so many more kids who needed a place to heal and grow. As he entered the hospital, he was greeted by Dr. Green, who had become more of a partner in his work than a mere colleague. "Ethan, it's good to see you again," Dr. Green said, offering him a warm handshake. "The playroom has been a huge success. We're already seeing a positive impact." Ethan nodded. "I'm glad to hear that. I want to keep pushing forward. I've been thinking about the next steps, about expanding the programs to include more art and music therapy. The kids need a chance to express themselves in creative ways." Dr. Green looked thoughtful. "That's a great idea. We've seen that the children who engage in creative therapies tend to have better outcomes emotionally and psychologically. If we can secure the funding for it, I think it could make a real difference." Ethan felt a surge of determination. "Consider it done. I'll take care of the funding. Let's get it rolling." The two of them walked through the hospital, making their way to the playroom. As they entered, Ethan was greeted by the sight of children laughing, playing, and engaging with the staff. Mia was there too, sitting on the floor, coloring in a sketchbook. She looked up when she saw Ethan and her face lit up. "Mr. Ethan," she exclaimed, running over to him. Ethan crouched down to her level, smiling as she handed him a drawing. "This is for you," Mia said, her voice filled with excitement. Ethan took the drawing from her hands, admiring the colorful sketch of a tree with birds flying around it. "It's beautiful, Mia," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "You have a real talent." Mia beamed. "I want to be an artist when I grow up. I want to paint all the time." Ethan's heart swelled with pride. He knew Mia had been through so much, but seeing her smile, seeing her dreams take shape, made everything worth it. "You can be anything you want, Mia. If you keep working hard and never give up, you'll make your dreams come true." The two of them sat together for a while, talking about art, life, and the future. Mia had such a pure, unwavering optimism, and it reminded Ethan of what truly mattered. As the conversation ended, Ethan stood up and looked around the room. The playroom was a symbol of hope, a place where children could escape their pain and find joy in the little things. But he knew that this was just the beginning. There were so many more children who needed this kind of space, this kind of care. And he was determined to make it happen. After spending time with Mia, Ethan left the hospital, his mind racing with ideas for the future. He wanted to ensure that the hospital could reach more children, that they could expand the programs and services even further. He needed to create partnerships with other organizations, bring in more resources, and find ways to make the hospital a place where kids could feel like they were part of something bigger than themselves. As Ethan drove home that evening, He realized that this wasn't just about building a legacy. It wasn't about making a name for himself. It was about helping the people who needed it the most, the children who had been forgotten by society, the ones who had been overlooked and ignored. He thought about Mia, about the other kids he had met in the hospital, and about how much they had inspired him. It was time for him to take his commitment to the next level, to push beyond the boundaries of what he had thought was possible. When he arrived home, Rebecca was waiting for him as always. She smiled as he walked in the door. "How was your day?" she asked, her voice gentle. Ethan sat down beside her and took a deep breath. "It was a good day. A really good day." Rebecca smiled, sensing that something had shifted. "You're not just talking about the hospital, are you?" Ethan shook his head, his voice full of emotion. "No. I'm talking about everything. I'm ready to do more. I'm ready to make a real difference, to build something that will last long after I'm gone." Rebecca looked at him, her eyes full of love and pride. "I'm so proud of you, Ethan. You're doing something incredible." Ethan smiled, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. He knew that this was just the beginning. There was more work to do, more lives to touch. And he was ready for whatever came next. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Ethan sat at his desk the following Monday, his mind swirling with plans for the hospital's next phase. He had spent the weekend poring over research, meeting with his team and calling potential partners who could help fund the expanded programs. There was a sense of urgency in the air. The project was growing faster than he had anticipated, and although he was excited, he felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. There was no turning back now. The work had to be done, and it had to be done well. But amidst the deadlines and strategy meetings, there was something deeper driving him, something more personal. It had been weeks since he had met Mia, and in that time she had been on his mind constantly. Her unshakable spirit, the way she had looked at him with such trust and hope, had made an indelible mark on him. The way her art had brought her joy, despite everything she had been through, made him wonder about the other children in the hospital. How many of them had stories that were untold, dreams that had yet to be realized? How many of them needed someone to believe in them, just as Mia had needed someone to believe in her? Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring out the window at the bustling city below. He knew he had to do more. More than just donate money or create programs. He had to become a part of the lives of these children, to show them that their struggles weren't invisible, that they weren't alone. He stood up, feeling a sense of resolve building inside of him. It was time to take the next step. He grabbed his jacket and headed out the door, making his way to the hospital once again. As he drove, he found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. He had started out as a young, ambitious entrepreneur, focused on success and wealth. He had built his company from the ground up, driven by the desire to be the best, to prove that he could make it on his own. But now, as he made his way to the hospital, he realized that what he had built had been a stepping stone to something much greater. The hospital wasn't just a project to him anymore. It had become a cause, one that had captured his heart and soul. It wasn't about numbers, profit margins, or accolades. It was about people. About children who deserved more than the hand they had been dealt. When Ethan arrived at the hospital, he was immediately greeted by Dr. Green, who seemed equally excited. "Ethan, great to see you. We've made some progress on the new art and music therapy program you suggested. We've already started reaching out to local artists and musicians, and we're in talks with a few schools that might be able to send students to volunteer." Ethan smiled, feeling a sense of pride. "That's amazing. Let's make sure we're reaching as many children as possible. I want to see them engage with the art, to feel like they can express themselves. We need to create a space where they can feel free to dream." Dr. Green nodded. "We're on the right track. But I think it's also important that we start bringing in some of the parents too. They need to be a part of this process, especially if we want to make lasting change." Ethan agreed. He had seen firsthand how the support of family could make a difference in a child's recovery. Parents were the cornerstone of their children's lives, and their involvement was crucial. He spent the next few hours walking through the hospital, meeting with the staff, discussing the logistics of the new programs, and brainstorming ways to make the facility even more welcoming and accessible. But as the day went on, Ethan's thoughts kept drifting back to the children. To Mia. He decided to visit the playroom again to see how the kids were doing. When he arrived, Mia was there, sitting at one of the tables, her head bent in concentration as she colored. Her mother, Sarah, was sitting nearby, chatting with one of the nurses. As soon as Mia saw Ethan, her face lit up, and she jumped to her feet, running over to him. "Mr. Ethan," she exclaimed, her voice full of excitement. Ethan smiled, crouching down to her level. "Hi Mia. How are you today?" Mia grinned. I'm good. I finished another picture. Do you want to see? She handed him her drawing, which this time depicted a beautiful sunset over the ocean, with birds soaring through the sky. I want to paint like the people you told me about, she said proudly. Ethan looked at the picture, his heart swelling with admiration. Mia, this is amazing. You've got real talent. You're going to be an incredible artist one day. Mia beamed, her eyes sparkling. I want to make pictures for everyone. For all the people who need them. Ethan's voice caught in his throat. He had seen a lot of children in his life, both in the business world and in his charitable work, but Mia's words hit him harder than anything else. There was so much hope in her, so much promise. She wasn't just painting pictures, she was building a future, creating a vision of something bigger than herself. After spending time with Mia, Ethan sat down with Sarah, who had been quietly observing the interaction. How is she doing? He asked, his voice soft. Sarah smiled. She's doing better thanks to you. The hospital has been such a blessing. But it's more than that. It's the way you've made her feel like she matters. Like her dreams are worth pursuing. Ethan nodded, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. I'm just glad to be a part of her journey. She's an inspiration to me, really. As he left the hospital later that day, Ethan felt a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in a long time. He had been so focused on the logistics, on the strategy, on the numbers. But now he understood that this was about something much deeper. It was about giving children the chance to dream, to believe in themselves, and to know that they were worth fighting for. As he drove home that night, he made a vow to himself. He would do whatever it took to make sure that Mia's dream, and the dreams of so many others like her, became a reality. No more excuses, no more waiting. It was time to act. Ethan was sitting at his desk late one night, the glow of his laptop screen illuminating his face. The office was quiet, most of the team had left hours ago, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something more needed to be done. His thoughts kept drifting back to the hospital, to Mia, to the children who had such incredible potential, yet were often overlooked by society. His phone buzzed on the desk, breaking his train of thought. It was a message from Dr. Green. Ethan, we have a new development. We've just received confirmation that we can start the therapy program for the children, but we need additional funds to cover the initial expenses. The good news is, we have a donor who is willing to match any contributions for the first $500,000. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He had been working tirelessly on securing funding for the new program, and this was the breakthrough they had been hoping for. But there was still one problem. The funds they had raised so far were far from enough. Ethan sat back in his chair, feeling a mixture of excitement and anxiety. He knew how much this program could help the children. It wasn't just about providing them with the tools to express themselves through art and music, it was about giving them a voice, a way to communicate their pain, their fears, and their hopes. It was a way to help them heal. But how could he raise the additional money? He could ask for donations from his business network, but that didn't feel like enough. The stakes were too high. He needed something bigger, something that could capture the public's imagination and make them believe in the cause as much as he did. He thought back to his meeting with Mia and her mother, Sarah. He thought about the power of storytelling, the way Mia's art had touched him in a way nothing else had. What if they could share the stories of the children in the hospital, their hopes and dreams, their struggles and triumphs? If the public could see their humanity, their potential, it might be enough to inspire the kind of generosity they needed. He could already picture it, a campaign, perhaps even a short documentary, that showed the children's stories through their own eyes. It would raise awareness and, most importantly, show the world that these children were not defined by their illnesses, they were defined by their dreams. The more Ethan thought about it, the more certain he became. He had to do this. He quickly typed out a response to Dr. Green. Let's do it. We'll create a campaign, but we need to be ready to tell the world about the children and their stories. I'll start working on it tomorrow. We can't afford to wait. Ethan sat back in his chair and breathed a sigh of relief. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it felt like the right decision. As he prepared to call it a night, his phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Sarah. Hi Ethan, just wanted to thank you again for everything you're doing. Mia has been more excited than ever to paint, and I can see the difference in her attitude. She's even started telling me about her dream of becoming a famous artist one day. I never thought I'd hear her talk like that. Ethan smiled as he read the message. Mia had come so far since the first time they met, and it was clear that the program had made a difference in her life. But as he read Sarah's message, a new sense of urgency washed over him. He couldn't let this momentum slip away. Mia's dream, her hope, had to be shared with the world. The next day, Ethan met with his team to discuss the plan for the campaign. He shared his vision of creating a platform for the children's stories, a way for people to connect with them on a deeper level. The team was immediately on board. They brainstormed ideas for the best way to tell the children's stories, how to capture their personalities, their dreams, and their unique voices. It was clear that this wasn't just about raising money, it was about giving these children a platform to be seen and heard, a chance to inspire others with their courage. The team spent hours refining the idea, working on the logistics, and developing a strategy. They knew it would take time and effort, but they also knew that it could change the lives of the children in the hospital forever. As the campaign began to take shape, Ethan found himself thinking more and more about his own role in all of this. He had built a successful business, but that had never truly fulfilled him. He had always felt like there was something missing, some deeper purpose he hadn't yet discovered. Now he realized what that purpose was: to use his success to help others, to create real change in the world. He wasn't just a businessman, he was a catalyst for something much greater than himself. Weeks passed and the campaign began to take off. They launched a website showcasing the children's artwork, their stories, and their dreams. They filmed interviews with the kids, capturing their personalities, their hopes for the future, and the challenges they faced. As the stories gained traction, donations started pouring in. The public response was overwhelming. People from all over the country, even the world, were moved by the children's stories. They were inspired by their resilience, their courage, and their unwavering hope for the future. And as the donations continued to grow, so did Ethan's sense of purpose. One afternoon, as Ethan sat in his office reviewing the campaign's success, he received a call from Sarah. "Ethan, I just wanted to let you know that Mia's artwork was featured in the local newspaper today. They did a story about the hospital and the therapy programs you helped set up, and they included one of her pieces. I can't believe it." Ethan's heart swelled with pride. "That's amazing. I'm so happy for her. She deserves all the recognition in the world." "She's been talking about her artwork more and more," Sarah continued. "It's like something clicked inside her. She's not just painting for herself anymore, she's painting for everyone. She wants to show the world what she can do." Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. He had helped Mia find her voice, but in doing so, he had found his own. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. The campaign had become an overwhelming success, far beyond Ethan's wildest expectations. He watched, day by day, as the donations poured in and the stories of the children continued to touch hearts across the country. Mia's art was displayed in galleries, her story was shared in schools, and people from all walks of life reached out to show their support. It wasn't just the financial contributions that struck Ethan, it was the way people were coming together, the way they were moved by the children's resilience, their dreams, and their strength. As the weeks went by, Ethan could feel something inside him shift. The sense of fulfillment he had been missing for so long was finally there, but it wasn't from the success of the campaign or the funds they raised. It was from knowing that he had made a real, tangible difference in people's lives. He had helped to provide a voice to children who had been silenced by their circumstances, and that was something far greater than any business achievement. One afternoon, Ethan stood outside the hospital, looking at the building that had become the symbol of his journey. The therapy program was thriving, and the children who had once been overlooked were now given the resources they needed to heal, to express themselves, and to grow. He thought about the long hours, the sleepless nights, the meetings and calls, and the obstacles they had faced along the way. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was that Mia and the others had found a way to communicate, to share their stories with the world. And for that, Ethan felt an overwhelming sense of pride. As he entered the hospital, he was greeted by Dr. Green, who had become a close partner in the mission to provide therapy for the children. "Ethan, I just wanted to thank you for everything you've done. I don't think words can express how much of an impact this has had on the kids," Dr. Green said, his voice filled with gratitude. Ethan smiled, a sense of humility washing over him. "It's been a team effort," he replied. "But seeing how far they've come, especially Mia, it's beyond anything I could have imagined." Ethan made his way to the art room, where Mia was busy working on a new painting. Her face lit up when she saw him. "Ethan," she exclaimed, running over to give him a hug. "Look at my new painting. It's about the first time I saw the ocean." Ethan studied the painting, a beautiful, vibrant depiction of a beach with waves crashing against the shore. There was something in her eyes as she spoke about it, a spark of joy that he had never seen before. Mia had transformed from a quiet, withdrawn child into someone with confidence and hope, all because she had been given the chance to share her voice through her art. Ethan could hardly believe the change he had witnessed in her. As he looked around the room at the other children, each of them working on their own projects, Ethan couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fulfillment. This wasn't just about the money or the success of the campaign. It was about the impact they had made, the lives they had changed, and the hope they had restored in these children who had been forgotten by so many. Later that evening, as Ethan sat in his office reflecting on everything that had transpired, he received a message from Sarah. "Ethan, I just wanted to say thank you again. Mia's life has been changed, and I can see her future in a way I never could before. She talks about becoming an artist now, and I believe she will. She believes she can. And that's because of you." Ethan sat back in his chair, a tear slipping down his cheek. The journey had been long, the challenges many, but in that moment he knew that every bit of effort had been worth it. The children had found their voice, and in doing so, they had changed the course of their own lives. And so had he. As Ethan looked out the window, the lights of the city shining in the distance, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known before. He had built his business empire, but it was this, helping others, giving them a chance, that had truly changed his life. If you've liked this story, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends.